I remember that summer evening like it was yesterday, though it's been years now, and the memory still clings to me like the damp fog that rolls off the Blue Ridge Parkway in the early mornings. I was 19 then, fresh out of high school and figuring out what came next, so my parents thought a few weeks at the family cabin would give me some space to think. The place was tucked away in the hills of North Carolina, just off the parkway near mile marker 300, where the road twists through thick forests of oak and pine. It wasn't much. A weathered log structure built by my grandfather in the 60s with a sagging porch, a stone fireplace, and windows that rattled in the wind. No neighbors for miles, just the endless woods pressing in from all sides, and that overgrown trail behind the cabin that led nowhere anyone ever went. My folks had driven into Asheville for supplies and a night out, leaving me to watch the place. "We'll be back by morning," my dad said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Enjoy the quiet, son." Quiet. That's what I thought it would be. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple, and the long shadows from the trees stretched across the yard like fingers reaching for the cabin. I settled into the old armchair by the living room window, a dog-eared paperback in hand, some thriller about lost hikers that seemed fitting for the setting. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of pine sap and earth, and the only sounds were the occasional chirp of crickets starting their evening chorus. I flipped pages lazily, sipping on a lukewarm soda, feeling that rare sense of solitude that borders on peace. But as the light faded, the woods seemed to come alive in subtle ways. A branch snapped somewhere out back, sharp enough to make me glance up. Probably a deer, I told myself. The area was full of them, wandering down from the ridges in search of food. I shook it off and kept reading, but my focus wavered. The cabin felt bigger without my parents there, the rooms echoing with emptiness. By the time true dusk settled in, around 8 or so, the rustling started. It was faint at first, like dry leaves being stirred by a breeze, but there was no wind that night. The air hung still and thick. I set the book down and listened, peering out the window into the gathering dark. The overgrown trail behind the porch was a tangled mess of vines and underbrush, vanishing into the trees after just a few yards. No one used it. It was more of a deer path than anything man-made. The sound came again, deliberate, like footsteps crunching slowly over fallen foliage. Not hurried, not random. I stood up, heart picking up a notch, and flicked on the porch light. The bulb cast a yellowish glow over the yard, illuminating the first few feet of the trail, but leaving the rest in shadow. Nothing there. I chuckled to myself, feeling foolish. "Get a grip," I muttered, blaming my imagination and the book for stirring up paranoia. But as I turned back to the chair, the whispers began. They were so soft at first, I thought it was the hum of the refrigerator or maybe the distant rumble of a car on the parkway. But no, this was different, guttural, murmuring tones that rose and fell like a conversation just out of earshot. Almost like words, but twisted, slurred into something unintelligible, carrying on the still air from beyond the tree line. I froze, straining to make sense of it. Was it voices? People out there? Hikers lost in the dark? The parkway attracted all sorts, tourists, backpackers, even the occasional drifter, but no one ventured off the main paths after sunset. The whispers grew a fraction louder, persistent, like they were edging closer. My skin prickled, a chill running down my spine despite the summer warmth. I moved to the window again, cupping my hands against the glass to block the reflection. The wood stared back, black and impenetrable. That's when unease turned to fear. I hurried to the front door, double-checking the lock, then did the same for the back. The cabin had sturdy bolts, the kind my grandfather installed after some break-ins in the 80s, but they felt flimsy now. I turned on every light in the place. The kitchen overhead, the hallway lamp, even the dim bulb in the bathroom, flooding the interior with harsh illumination while the outside remained shrouded. The whispers didn't stop. If anything, they seemed to respond, shifting direction as if whatever was making them was aware of my movements. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, thumbing through to my parents' numbers, but the signal bars were non-existent. Out here, cell service was spotty at best, and tonight it was dead. No bars, no Wi-Fi, the cabin didn't have it anyway. I was cut off, truly alone in a way I'd never felt before. Pacing the living room, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an animal, coyotes, or foxes making odd calls. But no, these were human-like, laced with a raspy quality that suggested throats and used to speaking. I returned to the window, heart hammering, and that's when I saw it. A shape in the underbrush, tall and hunched, silhouetted against the faint glow from the porch. It wasn't clear at first, just a darker patch amid the shadows. But as my eyes adjusted, details emerged. Ragged clothes hung off its frame, blending with the vines and leaves like camouflage. Dirty fabric, torn and matted with dirt, as if it had been worn for months without washing. It stood motionless for a moment, then shifted, revealing a pale face partially obscured by wild hair. Not a hiker, no backpack, no gear. This thing looked feral, like something that had crawled out of the woods after years of living rough. I backed away from the window, breath catching in my throat. The figure began to move, slowly circling the cabin, keeping to the edge of the light. I followed its progress from room to room, peeking through curtains. It tested the windows, dirty, claw-like hands pressing against the glass, nails scraping faintly as if checking for give. The whispers continued, now accompanied by heavy breathing, labored and wet, like someone struggling for air. I could hear it clearly now, right outside the walls. Panic surged. I dashed to the bedroom closet, the farthest point from the doors, and huddled inside among old coats and boxes. Phone clutched in my hand. I tried dialing 911 anyway, but the call failed, the screen mocking me with no service. Hours stretched on like that. Me curled up in the dark, listening to the scratches at the door, the occasional thud against the siding, the breaths fogging the windows from outside. My mind raced through possibilities. Was it a homeless person, driven mad by the isolation of these mountains? I'd heard stories growing up, tales from locals about mountain folk who shunned society, living in hidden shacks or caves, surviving on what the forest provided. Some said they were descendants of old settlers, gone feral over generations, avoiding contact but watching from the shadows. Grandpa used to spin yarns by the fire about strange sightings, footprints in the snow that led nowhere, whispers in the wind that sounded like names. I always thought they were just stories to scare kids, but now, in the suffocating confines of that closet, they felt all too real. The figure outside seemed to embody those legends, a lost soul, perhaps once human but twisted by the relentless wilderness. It didn't smash windows or force doors. It probed patiently, as if savoring the fear it instilled. Sweat soaked my shirt, the air in the closet growing stale. I whispered prayers I hadn't said since childhood, begging for dawn. The scratches came in waves, sometimes fading as if it had wandered off, only to return louder, more insistent. Once, I heard a low moan, almost sorrowful, that sent shivers through me. What did it want? Food? Shelter? Or something more sinister, like company in its madness? The night dragged, each minute an eternity. My legs cramped, but I didn't dare move, fearing any noise would invite it closer. Memories flooded in to fill the void. Childhood summers at the cabin, running through those same woods without a care, oblivious to the dangers lurking. How naive I'd been. Now, the forest felt alive, hostile, harboring secrets that no one was meant to uncover. As the first hints of gray light filtered through the cabin, the sounds tapered off. The whispers hushed, the scratches ceased, replaced by the tentative calls of morning birds. I waited another hour, muscles aching, before creeping out of the closet. The house was silent, sunlight streaming in like a lifeline. I approached the back window cautiously, scanning the yard. Nothing. No figure. No movement. Steeling myself, I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch, the cool air relief against my clammy skin. That's when I saw the footprints, bare, human but calloused and elongated, like feet in used shoes. They circled the cabin in a deliberate path, pressing close to the walls before veering off into the overgrown trail, disappearing into the underbrush. I followed them a short way, heart pounding, but they vanished amid the leaves, as if swallowed by the earth. I never told my parents the full story when they returned that morning, laughing about their night in town. I mumbled something about hearing animals and left it at that. But I couldn't stay there alone again. We sold the cabin a year later, after I moved away for college, but the memory lingers. Even now, in the city, when the wind whispers through the streets or shadows stretch long in the evening, I wonder about that figure. Was it a drifter, desperate and deranged? Or something older, a remnant of the mountain's forgotten souls, forever watching from the wild? The Blue Ridge holds its secrets close, and some nights, I swear I can still hear those guttural murmurs, calling from the dark. The drive back from town with my parents that next day was quiet for me. They chattered about groceries and the latest news, but I stared out at the passing trees, their branches like skeletal arms clawing at the sky. The parkway wound through the ridges, beautiful in the daylight, but I knew better now. The beauty masked something primal, untamed. Back at the cabin, I busied myself unpacking, avoiding the windows. The footprints were still there, though the sun had dried the dew, making them fainter. I pointed them out to Dad casually, saying maybe a bear or something. He laughed it off. Human feet? Out here? Probably just some hiker cutting through. But his eyes lingered on them a moment too long, and I wondered if he remembered Grandpa's stories too. That afternoon, I ventured a little farther down the trail, armed with a walking stick and false bravado. The path narrowed quickly, overgrown with briars that tugged at my jeans. Sunlight dappled the ground, but the air grew cooler, heavier, as if the woods were breathing. I didn't go far, maybe 100 yards, before turning back, a prickling sensation on my neck like eyes boring into me. Nothing visible, but the feeling persisted. That night, with my parents home, I slept fitfully, dreams haunted by hunched shapes and whispered pleas. Waking in sweats, I'd listen to the silence, half expecting the rustling to return. Weeks passed, and summer waned. I threw myself into hikes during the day, sticking to marked trails on the parkway, where tourists milled about with cameras and maps. Safety in numbers, I figured. But even there, I'd catch glimpses, shadows flitting between trees, too quick to be sure. Once, near an overlook, an old ranger chatted with me about the area. "These mountains have history," he said, squinting at the horizon. "Folks disappear sometimes, get lost, or choose to stay lost." I asked about whispers, feral people. He paused, then shrugged. Legends. But every legend starts somewhere. His words stuck with me, seeding doubt. Leaving the cabin at Summer's Inn felt like escape. Back home in the suburbs, with streetlights and neighbors, the terror faded to a dull ache. But it never fully left. I'd research online late at night. Stories of missing persons in Appalachia, accounts of wild men sighted in the woods. Some dated back centuries. Escaped slaves, Civil War deserters, hermits driven mad by solitude. Plausible explanations, yet none eased the knot in my gut. What if that figure wasn't alone? What if others lurked, a hidden community watching the intruders in their domain? Years later, married with kids, I avoid the woods. Family vacations stick to beaches or cities. But sometimes on quiet evenings, a breeze through an open window carries a faint rustle. And I'm back there, alone in that cabin, whispers closing in. I check the locks, peer into the dark, wondering if it's followed me. The mountains don't forget, and neither do I. The dread lingers, a shadow in my mind, whispering that some things in the wild are better left unseen. Returning to the area once, years after, was a mistake. I was in my 30s, driving the parkway for nostalgia's sake, or maybe to confront the past. The cabin was gone, sold to developers who turned it into a rental, but the trail remained, overgrown as ever. I pulled over near the old spot, heart thudding, and walked a bit. The air smelled the same, pine and earth, with an undercurrent of decay. No whispers that day, just wind sighing through leaves. But as I turned to leave, a branch snapped deliberate close. I froze, scanning the trees. Nothing. Yet the feeling returned, that watch sensation, raising hairs on my arms. I hurried back to the car, locking doors before driving off. Glancing in the rear view, The woods receded, but the unease stayed. Therapy helped some. Trauma from isolation, the counselor said. Your mind filled the void with fears. Rational, but it doesn't explain the footprints, the scratches I found on the cabin's siding that morning. Faint grooves like nails drag slow. Or the way. Months later, a local news story caught my eye. A hiker gone missing near that stretch of parkway, last seen wandering off trail. Search parties found nothing but bare footprints leading into the wild, vanishing abruptly. Coincidence? Maybe, but it stirs the whispers in my dreams, guttural and insistent, calling names I can't quite hear. My kids ask about Grandpa's cabin sometimes, seeing old photos. I smile, change the subject. Too remote, I say. Bugs and boredom. But inside, fear coils. Fear of what might still wait there, hunched and ragged, drawn to the light of solitary souls. The Blue Ridge is vast, hiding pockets of forgotten life, where humanity frays at the edges. I wonder if that figure ever found what it sought, or if it still circles in the dark, murmuring to the trees. Some nights, lying awake, I listen for it, just in case. The dread never fully fades. It whispers on, a lingering echo from that overgrown trail behind. It was a rainy autumn night in late October, the kind where the chill seeps into your bones and the world outside blurs into a gray haze. I'd rented this remote cabin along the Blue Ridge Parkway with a group of friends for a weekend getaway, escaping the grind of city life in Charlotte, trading concrete for the rustling leaves and misty ridges of western North Carolina. The place was nothing fancy. A single-story A-frame with creaky wooden floors, a leaky roof that pattered under the downpour, and windows that offered views of endless forest dipping into foggy hollows. No cell service worth a damn, no streetlights, just the isolation that we'd craved. My buddies Jake, Sarah, and Mike had decided on a late afternoon hike despite the threatening skies, promising to be back before midnight. We'll grab some photos of the overlooks, Jake had said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Don't eat all the pizza without us. I waved them off from the porch, watching their taillights disappear down the gravel drive, swallowed by the gathering dusk. Alone now, I felt a twinge of unease, but shook it off. After all, I was 28, not some kid afraid of the dark. The rain started soft at first, a gentle tapping on the tin roof that grew into a steady drum as evening deepened. I busied myself in the kitchen, heating up frozen pizzas in the old oven and cracking open a beer from the cooler. The cabin smelled of damp wood and pine, mixed with the faint mustiness of disuse. It was one of those seasonal rentals, probably empty most of the year. I flipped on the radio for company, but all I got was static interspersed with faint country tunes. So I switched to my phone's playlist, letting acoustic guitar fill the space. Outside, the fog rolled in thick, like smoke from some unseen fire, blanketing the driveway and creeping up from the hollow below. The ridges vanished, leaving the cabin an island in a sea of white. I ate at the small table by the window, staring out into the murk, the glass fogging from my breath. The house creaked under the weight of the rain, settling groans that echoed through the empty rooms. It was peaceful, in a way, solitude I'd rarely experienced. But as the hours ticked by, a subtle unease settled in my gut, like the feeling you get when you think someone's watching you from across a crowded room. By 9 o'clock, the storm had intensified, wind whipping branches against the siding in rhythmic thuds. I checked my phone again. No signal, no text from the group. They were probably hunkered down somewhere, waiting it out. I washed up the dishes, the hot water steaming the window above the sink, and that's when the first knock came. Sharp, insistent. 3 raps on the back door, clear as day over the rain. My heart skipped. No one should be out there. The nearest neighbor was miles down the parkway. And in this weather, I froze, suds dripping from my hands, listening. Maybe a branch or the wind playing tricks. But it came again, knock, 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 deliberate like someone demanding entry. I dried my hands on a towel, pulse quickening, and approached the door cautiously. Hello, I called out, voice steadier than I felt. Who's there? Silence answered, thick and heavy, broken only by the patter of rain. Then, shuffling, wet feet on the wooden porch, slow and uneven like someone shifting weight. I leaned toward the peephole, the glass cold against my eye. The backlight was on, casting a weak glow over the porch, but the fog distorted everything beyond a few feet. At first, nothing, just swirling mist and the dark shapes of trees. Then, a silhouette emerged, tall but emaciated, shoulders hunched, wild hair matted and dripping. Eyes glinted in the light, sharp and feral, like a cornered animal sizing up prey. It wasn't dressed for the weather. No coat, just ragged layers that clung wetly to its frame. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a lost hiker begging for shelter. The figure stood there, head tilted slightly, as if listening. Its fingers, long, dirt-crusted, reached out, scraping the doorframe with a slow, probing motion, nails dragging like it was testing for weaknesses. I backed away, breath shallow, mind racing. Who the hell was this? A drifter? Someone escaped from somewhere? The mountains were full of stories, old-timers in bars whispering about folks who vanished into the woods, living rough, gone feral from years of solitude. I didn't open the door. Instead, I grabbed a wooden chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the knob, barricading it as best I could. Heart pounding in my ears, I retreated to the living room, flipping off the interior lights to hide my movements. The shuffling continued outside, circling now, porch boards creaking underweight. It moved to the windows, a shadow passing across the glass. I peeked from behind the curtain. There it was, face pressed close, pale skin streaked with mud, mouth moving in silent words. Please? Threats? I couldn't tell, but the eyes locked onto the room, searching. Rain streamed down the pane, blurring the features, but the intent was clear, probing, patient, like a predator waiting for a mistake. I whispered to myself, "Stay calm. They're coming back soon." But the clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second stretching. The power flickered then, once, twice, before plunging the cabin into darkness. The hum of the fridge died, leaving only the storm's roar. Panic surged. I fumbled for the flashlight on the counter, clicking it on with trembling hands. The beam cut through the room, casting long shadows that danced with the wind. Outside, the figure hadn't moved, still at the window, breath fogging the glass in rhythmic puffs. I shone the light out, illuminating it fully for the first time. Dirt-streaked skin stretched tight over bones, torn fabric hanging in shreds, like clothes scavenged from trash or worn through seasons in the wild. Wild eyes reflected the beam, unblinking, with a hunger that wasn't for food. This was someone, or something, escaped from society, feral and untamed, drawn to the warm light in the hollow. It raised a hand, palm flat against the window, leaving a muddy smear as it pressed harder. I backed into the hallway, flashlight beam jittering. The cabin felt smaller now, walls closing in. I considered the front door, maybe run to the car, drive for help, but the keys were in my jacket by the back entrance, and the thought of crossing paths with it terrified me. Instead, I holed up in the bedroom, door locked, pushing the dresser against it for good measure. Sitting on the bed, knees drawn up, I listened. The shuffling persisted, around the house now, testing each window, each door. Scratches came faintly, nails on wood or glass, probing for entry. The rain masked some of it, but not all. Occasional thuds suggested it was leaning against the walls, waiting. My mind wandered to legends I'd heard. Appalachian tales of wild people, descendants of hermits or runaways who shunned civilization, surviving in hidden camps deep in the ridges. Locals swore by sightings, gaunt figures in the mist, whispers in the wind, footprints that led nowhere. I'd laughed them off as folklore, but now, in the dark, they wrapped around me like the fog outside. Hours blurred. I checked my watch, 10:30, 11. The beam of my flashlight dimmed, batteries waning, so I conserved it, sitting in blackness broken only by lightning flashes. Each bolt illuminated the room in stark white, and once, through the curtain gap, I saw the silhouette still there, lurking at the edge of the porch, unmoving in the downpour. What did it want? Shelter from the storm? Or something more insidious, like dragging me into its world of isolation. I thought of my friends. Were they safe? Had they encountered this thing on the trail? Fear twisted into guilt. Maybe I should have gone with them. The shuffling faded at times, only to return closer, more insistent. A low moan carried on the wind once. Human, but ragged, like a voice in used as speech. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp, tears stinging my eyes. Survival instincts kicked in. I gripped a bedside lamp as a makeshift weapon, base heavy in my palm. Midnight came and went. The rain eased to a drizzle, but the fog thickened, muffling the world. I strained for sounds of a car, headlights, engine rumble, but nothing. Then, finally, around 1, a distant hum grew. Tires on gravel, lights piercing the mist like beacons. The shuffling stopped abruptly. I crept to the window, peering out. Headlights swept the driveway, illuminating the porch. Empty now, save for wet footprints trailing off into the grass. My friend's car pulled up, doors slamming, voices laughing about the epic slogback. I unbarricaded the bedroom, rushing to greet them, but said nothing at first, just hugged Sarah tighter than usual, relief flooding me. "Rough night?" Mike asked, noticing my pallor. I mumbled about the storm knocking out power, forcing a smile. By morning, the fog had lifted, revealing the Blue Ridge in all its autumn glory, vibrant reds and golds carpeting the hollows. We packed up early, eager to head home. As I loaded the car, I circled the cabin one last time. Muddy handprints smeared the windows, palm-sized and streaked like desperate grasps. Footprints encircled the foundation, bare, callous soles imprinted in the soft earth, leading toward the treeline before vanishing into the underbrush. I pointed them out to Jake, who frowned. Probably a raccoon or something. But his voice lacked conviction. We drove away without looking back, the parkway winding through sun-dappled forests that now seemed watchful. That was 5 years ago, but the memory clings, surfacing on rainy nights when the wind howls. I moved farther south, to flatter lands without ridges or hollows, but the dread follows. Friends drifted apart after that trip. Sarah mentioned nightmares. Mike stopped hiking altogether. I researched once, late at night. Reports of vagrants in the Appalachians, people lost to mental illness or choice, living feral in the wilds. Missing persons cases dotted the maps, some never found, others cited as shadows in the mist. Was it one of them, drawn to our light like a moth? Or something older, a guardian of the hollows, resenting intruders? I don't know, and the not knowing gnaws. Sometimes in quiet moments, I hear shuffling in the rain, faint, insistent, and wonder if it's out there still, lurking in foggy nights, waiting for the next solitary soul. The mountains keep their secrets, and mine echoes with them, a lingering sorrow for the isolation that binds us all. The drive home that day was tense, conversation stilted. Sarah kept glancing in the rear view, as if expecting pursuit. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" she asked finally. I hesitated, then shook my head. Just the storm. But lies have weight, and it hung between us. Back in Charlotte, I threw myself into work, burying the night in routines. Yet sleep evaded me. Dreams replayed the silhouette, its eyes glinting, mouth shaping words I strained to hear. Therapy suggested anxiety from isolation, prescribing pills that dulled the edges but didn't erase the core. A year later, curiosity, or masochism, drove me back. Alone this time, I parked in an overlook near the rental, fog rolling in as dusk fell. The hollow below looked unchanged, mist swallowing the cabin's outline. I walked the trail my friends had taken, boots sinking in mud, listening. Branches snapped in the distance, deer, I told myself. But the air felt heavy, charged. A low moan echoed, wind perhaps, but my skin crawled. I turned back, heart racing, convinced eyes watched from the trees. News clippings haunt me now. Another hiker vanished near that stretch, search dogs losing the scent in the fog. Footprints found, bare, leading into the wild. Coincidence? Or a pattern? Feral souls claiming the lost? I avoid the mountains, but they call in whispers reminding me of vulnerability. What if it wasn't malice, but desperation, a plea twisted by madness? The thought brings sorrow, for whatever lurked that night was once like me, before the hollows claimed it. And in quiet rains, I wonder if I'm next, shadows lurking just beyond the light. It was the winter after my grandfather passed, that bitter stretch of January where the days bleed into endless gray and the nights clamp down like a vice. He'd left me the old house near the Blue Ridge Parkway, tucked away in the Virginia side of the Appalachians, a place he'd built with his own hands back in the 50s. It wasn't much, a squat, stone-faced cabin with a wraparound porch sagging under decades of snow, surrounded by pines that whispered secrets to the wind. No close neighbors, just miles of ridgeline and hollows where the fog liked to linger. I was there alone for the weekend, sorting through his things, yellowed photos, rusted tools, boxes of letters that smelled of pipe tobacco and regret. At 32, with a failing marriage back in Richmond and a job that barely paid the bills, I figured the solitude would do me good. Clear my head, maybe find some closure. Grandpa had been a quiet man, full of stories about the mountains, recluses who vanished into the wild, living like ghosts among the trees. I'd always nodded along, thinking them tall tales. That first night, as snow dusted the ground and the wind howled through the eaves, I learned otherwise. The sun set early, around 4:30, plunging the house into a dim twilight that the single bulb in the living room struggled to push back. I spent the afternoon upstairs in his bedroom, going through dresser drawers filled with faded flannel shirts and old pocket watches. Downstairs, the furnace hummed sporadically, fighting the chill that seeped through the cracks. I made myself a simple dinner, canned soup heated on the wood stove, and ate at the kitchen table, listening to the radio crackle with static-laced forecasts of more snow. The house felt heavier without him, every creak of the floorboards echoing like a memory. By 8, I'd moved to the den, sorting papers by the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows on the paneled walls. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending flurries dancing in the porch light. It was peaceful in a lonely way, the kind of quiet that forces you to confront your own thoughts. That's when the scratching started. Slow, deliberate, coming from the basement door at the end of the hallway. At first, I dismissed it as mice. Old houses like this were full of them, especially in winter when they sought warmth. But the sound was too rhythmic, drag, pause, drag, like nails trailing across wood, methodical and unhurried. I set down a stack of letters, ears straining. The wind howled outside, but this was distinct, muffled yet insistent. I stood, grabbing the flashlight from the mantel, Grandpa's old mag light, heavy and reliable, and walked to the door. It was a thick oak slab, bolted shut as always. The basement was mostly storage, damp and forgotten. I pressed my ear against it, the wood cold on my cheek. Scratch, scratch. Nothing frantic, just persistent. Damn rodents, I muttered, though a prickle of unease stirred in my chest. The house was isolated, roads slick with ice, no one around for help if needed. I jiggled the handle, but it held firm. The noise didn't stop. If anything, it grew a touch louder, as if responding to my presence. I paced the hallway, debating. Grandpa had warned about critters getting in through the foundation cracks, but this didn't sound like scurrying paws. It was almost human. Curiosity gnawed at me, overriding caution. I slid back the bolt, the metal scraping loudly, and eased the door open. A rush of cold, musty air wafted up, carrying the scent of earth and mildew. The stairs descended into pitch black, wooden steps worn smooth from years of use. I clicked on the flashlight, beam cutting through the gloom, and started down, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was as I remembered. Concrete floors stained with age, shelves lined with dusty jars, old tools hanging on pegboards, boxes stacked in corners. No sign of mice, no droppings, no nests. The scratching had ceased the moment I opened the door, leaving an oppressive silence broken only by my breathing. I swept the light around, shadows leaping away. A draft caught my attention, cold air whistling from a small window high on the far wall. one I'd never noticed before, half buried at ground level. It was cracked open an inch, frames splintered as if forced. Odd. Grandpa was meticulous about securing the place. I approached, heart beating a little faster, and shone the beam outside. Snow blanketed the yard, pristine except for disturbances near the foundation. Mounds of dirt and leaves pushed aside, like something had been digging. Then, movement. A figure crouched just beyond the glass, ragged and still. My breath hitched. It was human-shaped, but feral. Matted hair tangled with twigs, skin pale and dirt-smeared, eyes wild and reflecting the light like a deer's in headlights. Clad in tattered layers that might have once been clothes, it stared back, unblinking, fingers caked with soil, as if it had been burrowing toward the warmth inside. Time slowed. The figure didn't move at first, just watched, breath fogging the cracked pane in shallow puffs. Panic surged through me. This wasn't an animal, but it wasn't right either. Like one of those mountain recluses Grandpa spoke of, folks who'd fled society decades ago, surviving on roots and game, their minds frayed by endless isolation. I slammed the window shut, glass rattling, and latched it with trembling hands. But it lunged then, banging against the frame with a guttural snarl that echoed in the basement. The impact shook the wall, dirt crumbling from the sill. I stumbled back, flashlight beam jerking wildly, and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door behind me and throwing the bolt. My chest heaved, adrenaline flooding my veins. What the hell was that? A vagrant? A madman? The house suddenly felt exposed, every window a vulnerability. I raced through the rooms, checking locks, front door, back, all the windows, heart pounding like a drum. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing the roads in white silence. Even if I wanted to leave, the driveway was impassable, tires no match for the drifts. The phone line was out, static when I lifted the receiver, probably down by the wind or ice. No cell signal out here. Grandpa had always said the mountains blocked it. I was trapped, alone with whatever prowled outside. And it was moving now. I heard it circle the house, footsteps crunching snow, muffled but deliberate. It tested the back door first, knob rattling softly, then a push against the wood. I backed into the den, grabbing the poker from the fireplace, its iron cold in my grip. The wind masked some sounds, but not all. Breaths fogging the windows, heavy and labored like someone or something pressing close to peer inside. I dimmed the lights, not wanting to silhouette myself, and huddled by the fire, poker ready. The scratching resumed, this time on the exterior walls, nails dragging along the stone, probing for weak spots. It moved methodically, from window to window, a shadow passing in the periphery of my vision. Once at the kitchen pane, I caught a glimpse. Gaunt face, eyes hollow with desperation or madness. Mouth slightly agape, as if murmuring to itself. Not aggressive in a frenzied way, but patient, like a hunter wearing down prey. My mind raced to Grandpa's stories, told by the same fire on winter nights like this. The hills take people, he'd say, pipe glowing. Some come back changed, wild as the wolves. They watch from the trees, wait for the weak. I'd laugh then, but now those words wrapped around me, chilling deeper than the cold. Was this one of them? A relative, perhaps, lost to the family lore? Or just a poor soul driven feral by the unforgiving ridges? Hours dragged. I fed the fire sparingly, embers glowing red, casting the room in a hellish light. The prowling continued, thuds against the siding, occasional grunts carried on the wind. I whispered to myself, just hold till morning, but doubt crept in. What if it found a way in? The basement window, had I secured it enough? I considered barricading more, but fear pinned me in place. Memories surfaced unbidden. Grandpa's last days, frail in his bed, muttering about shadows in the woods. They come when you're alone, he'd rasped. I chalked it up to delirium, but now, the phone remained dead, snow piled higher outside, muting the world. Isolation pressed in, a tangible weight, making the house feel like a cage. Around midnight, the storm eased, leaving a profound quiet broken only by the intruder's movements. It lingered longest at the front window, breaths rhythmic, fogging the glass in patterns that almost looked like handprints. I stared from across the room, poker raised, sweat beating despite the chill. A low moan escaped it then, sorrowful, almost human, sending shivers down my spine. Was it in pain? Hungry? Or calling to others? The thought terrified me. What if it wasn't alone? Grandpa had mentioned clans, hidden in the hollows, shunning the modern world. I closed my eyes, praying for dawn, the poker growing heavy in my hands. Sleep evaded me, but exhaustion dulled the edges. The prowling tapered as gray light filtered through the curtains, the figure retreating with the night. I waited another hour, listening to silence before venturing out. The house was still, snow glittering under a weak sun. Footprints encircled the property, bare, human but calloused, toes splayed like feet long free of shoes. They wove around the foundation, pressing close where it had scratched, before vanishing into the wilderness, swallowed by the pines. No other signs, no tools, no belongings, just those tracks leading nowhere. I left that day once the roads cleared, boxing up what I could and locking the door behind me. Sold the place months later to some out-of-towners who saw charm in the isolation. But the encounter haunts me, a shadow in quiet moments. Back in the city, with lights and noise, I still hear scratching on windy nights, see wild eyes and reflections. Was it a recluse, surviving on the fringes? Or something Grandpa knew, a secret buried in those hills? The mountains don't yield answers easily. They hoard them like the snow in their hollows. I wonder if it's still out there, circling in the dark, waiting for the next solitary soul. The dread lingers, a quiet sorrow for what the wild claims and what it leaves behind. The drive out was slow, tires crunching over packed snow, the parkway empty save for a few ravens perched on guardrails. I glanced in the rear view more than once, half expecting a ragged form to emerge from the trees. Back home, I threw myself into routine, work, divorce papers, therapy sessions where I skirted the truth. Just grief, I'd say, but nights brought dreams. Descending those stairs, the figure's eyes pleading or accusing. I researched sporadically. Old newspapers clipping about disappearances in the Blue Ridge, hermits spotted by hikers, footprints in winter snow that led to dead ends. One article chilled me. A local from the 70s, gone missing after a storm, family claiming he'd joined the wild ones. Folklore, sure, but it mirrored Grandpa's tales too closely. Years passed. I remarried, had a kid, moved to the coast where the air smells of salt, not pine. But the mountains call sometimes in the howl of wind or the scratch of branches on windows. My son asks about Grandpa's house, seeing faded photos. I smile, change the subject. Too cold up there. Inside, fear coils. Fear of returning, of finding those footprints anew. What if it was family, a lost uncle twisted by time? Or just a mirror of what isolation does, fraying the mind until humanity slips away? The confusion gnaws. Sorrow for the unseen, souls the ridge's harbor. Some evenings, staring at the horizon, I listen for moans in the breeze, wondering if the wild ever lets go. It hasn't for me. The scratching echoes on, a lingering whisper from that basement door. It was early spring, that fickle time in the Appalachians when the days tease with warmth but the nights still bite with a lingering chill. I'd agreed to house sit for my Aunt Clara in her isolated cabin off the Blue Ridge Parkway, up near the North Carolina-Virginia line, where the road snakes through ridges like a forgotten vein. She was off visiting cousins in Knoxville, dealing with some family drama, and needed someone to keep an eye on the place, feed the stray cats that wandered by, make sure the pipes didn't freeze. At 25, fresh off a breakup and between jobs, I figured the quiet would be a reset. The cabin was a modest thing. Weathered cedar siding, a tin roof that sang in the rain, and a porch overlooking a sea of blooming rhododendrons that painted the hillsides pink and purple. No neighbors for at least 5 miles, just the parkway humming faintly in the distance with occasional tourist traffic. Cell service was patchy, but I had a landline for emergencies. "It'll be peaceful," Aunt Clara had said, handing me the keys. just you and the mountains. I nodded, not knowing how right and wrong she was. The first day passed easy enough. I unpacked my bag in the guest room, stocked the fridge with groceries from town, and spent the afternoon wandering the property. The underbrush was thick behind the cabin, a tangle of laurel and vines that choked out any real path into the woods. Rhododendrons bloomed in clusters, their petals unfurling like secrets, but the air held an eerie quiet. No bird song, no rustle of squirrels, just the occasional breeze sighing through the pines. I chalked it up to the season, animals still hunkered down from winter. By evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges, casting long shadows that swallowed the yard, I settled in. Brewed some coffee, put on an old record, Aunt Clara's collection of bluegrass tunes, and sat on the porch with a book. The light faded slow, the sky bruising purple, and the porch bulb flicked on automatically, spilling a warm glow over the steps. It was serene, that kind of solitude where your thoughts echo louder than the world. But as true dark settled, around 7 or so, I noticed the movement. Branches swaying in the dense underbrush at the yard's edge, subtle at first, like a whisper through the leaves. No wind stirred the air. The rhododendrons hung still, petals undisturbed. I set the book down, squinting into the gloom. Probably deer, I thought. The area was thick with them, especially at dusk when they foraged. I'd seen tracks earlier, hoofprints pressed into the soft earth. The swaying stopped, then resumed, deliberate, as if something pushed through carefully. I stood, leaning on the railing, but saw nothing, just shadows playing tricks. Shrugging it off, I headed inside, locking the screen door behind me. Routine took over. Washed dishes flipped through channels on the ancient TV, mostly static, a few fuzzy stations from Asheville. The cabin creaked as it cooled, old wood settling, and I felt that familiar twinge of aloneness, but it was manageable. Until the eyes appeared. It started with a glint, 2 piercing orbs catching the porch light, unblinking from the foliage about 30 feet out. I was at the kitchen window, rinsing a mug, when they locked onto me. Not low like a raccoon's or fox's. These were higher, chest level on a man, steady and intelligent. Too aware. My hands froze under the tap, water running cold over my skin. Deer eyes reflect green or gold. But these were pale, almost human, staring with an intent that sent a chill racing up my spine. I turned off the faucet, the drip echoing in the silence, and stared back. The eyes didn't waver, didn't blink, just watched. Not an animal. Something about the spacing, the focus screamed wrong. I backed away slowly, heart picking up, and moved to the living room window for a better angle. They followed, shifting through the underbrush, branches parting silently. Whatever it was tracking me. Panic bubbled low, but I tamped it down. Locked the front door, already bolted the back, and checked the windows, sliding latches home. The cabin had sturdy locks, the kind Aunt Clara installed after some vandalism years back, but they felt inadequate now. I flicked on more lights, flooding the interior, but that only made the outside blacker, a void pressing against the glass. Soft thuds started then, against the siding, like hands patting the wood, feeling for seams or weaknesses. Not aggressive, but exploratory, moving along the exterior wall. I retreated to the center of the room, breath shallow, listening. Thud, pause, thud. Methodical, patient. I grabbed my phone, 2 bars spotty, and dialed 911, whispering when the operator answered. There's someone outside my cabin, trying to get in. I gave the address, voice trembling. She was calm, professional. Units are dispatched, but with the location, it'll be at least 2 hours. Stay inside, barricade if you can. 2 hours. The remoteness hit me like a gut punch. The parkway was empty at night, roads winding and dark. Hanging up, I killed the interior lights to even the odds, plunging the cabin in a shadow save for the porch glow filtering through curtains. Crouching by the window, I peered out. The eyes were closer now, at the yard's edge, and as I watched, a figure emerged from the underbrush. Gaunt, clad in filthy layers that hung like rags, blending with the dirt and leaves. Matted hair obscured the face, but the movements were primal, stealthy, like a predator accustomed to the wild. Not stumbling like a lost hiker. This was deliberate hunting, drawn, perhaps, to the solitary light piercing the dark, a beacon for whatever lurked in these hills. I'd heard whispers in town, stories of feral people, folks who dropped off the grid, living in the ridges like ghosts, surviving on scraps and instinct. Aunt Clara dismissed them as folklore, but her eyes always flickered when the topic came up. Now, in the dim, it felt too real. The figures circled slowly, keeping to the shadows, testing the porch steps with a tentative foot. I heard the creak of wood, faint but clear. Then at the front door, the knob twisted, slow, probing, metal clicking softly. My blood ran cold. I backed into the hallway, grabbing a cast iron skillet from the kitchen as a weapon. It paused, then whispered hoarsely, words lost in the night, muffled through the door, but the tone was raspy and used like a voice rusted from disuse. Pleading? Threatening? I couldn't tell, but it raised the hairs on my neck. Barricading myself in the bedroom, I shoved the dresser against the door, its legs scraping the floor. Sat on the bed, skillet in lap, ears straining. The roaming continued, footsteps crunching gravel, thuds on walls, breaths fogging windows as it peered in. Hours stretched, each sound amplified in the quiet. A branch snap, a low mutter carried on the breeze. Spring air turned clammy, sweat beating on my skin despite the chill. My mind wandered in the dark, filling voids with fears. Was it alone? These mountains held secrets. Old mining camps abandoned. Hollows where families once eked out lives before vanishing into legend. Feral wanderers, they called them. Escaped from asylums. War vets broken by trauma, or just souls the wild claimed. Aunt Clara's husband had disappeared hiking years ago. She never spoke of it, but photos showed a haunted look. Had he become this? The whispers came again, closer to the bedroom window. Hoarse fragments, almost words, stirring a pity mixed with terror. What drove it here? Hunger? Loneliness? Or something darker? A need to pull others into its shadow world? The skillet grew heavy, my arms aching, but I didn't dare relax. Check the clock. Midnight 1-2. Help seemed a myth, the operator's voice a distant dream. Dawn crept in gray, light filtering through curtains, and the sounds faded. No more thuds, no whispers, just birds tentatively chirping, rhododendrons blooming indifferent. I waited another hour, muscles cramped, before easing the dresser aside and creeping out. The cabin was untouched inside, but outside, trampled plants ringed the porch, stems crushed where it had paced. Handprints smeared the window sills, dirty palms pressed flat, fingers splayed as if grasping for entry. Footprints wove through the yard, bare calisoles vanishing into the underbrush, swallowed by the blooming thicket. No other trace, no tools, no belongings. Just evidence of a feral wanderer, surviving in the wilds, intruding on the vulnerable like a ghost from the ridges. I packed that morning, left a note for Aunt Clara, and drove away without looking back. Told her a white lie. Work called me home early. But the encounter scarred me, a quiet wound that festers. Back in the city, with locks and lights and people, I still feel watched on spring evenings when branches sway without wind. Avoid the woods, skip hikes, but the mountains linger in dreams. Eyes piercing the dark, hoarse whispers calling names I can't hear. Was it hunting, or seeking connection in its madness? The confusion aches, sorrow for whatever soul it was, once human, now frayed by isolation. I wonder if it's still out there, drawn to distant lights, forever roaming the underbrush. The dread doesn't fade. It watches unblinking from the edges of my mind. The drive down the parkway that day was a blur, curves twisting like doubts. I stopped at an overlook, staring at the blooming ridges, half expecting eyes to glint from the green. Nothing but the feeling clung. Back home, I threw out the clothes I'd worn, as if fabric held the scent of fear. Nights brought insomnia. I'd pace, checking windows, hearing thuds in the wind. Therapy called it PTSD, from isolation, prescribed meds that blurred edges but didn't erase the core. Researched sporadically, forum posts about Appalachian sightings, grainy photos of ragged figures, stories of missing persons resurfacing wild. One account mirrored mine. A house sitter terrorized, whispers in the night. Coincidence? Or a pattern? Feral lives intersecting the tame? Years on, married now with a daughter, I steer clear of cabins, opt for beaches where the horizon is open. But spring blooms trigger it. Rhododendrons in a nursery, pink petals stirring unease. My wife notices, asks gently. I shrug, say old memories. Inside, sorrow swells for the vulnerable. Me then, or that figure now? What if it was family? A lost relative Aunt Clara never mentioned. She passed last year, taking secrets to the grave. I considered returning once to confront the spot, but turned back at the parkway entrance, heart racing. The underbrush hides too much. Eyes watching, always watching. Confusion lingers, fear a quiet companion, whispering that the wild never truly releases its hold. Some nights, staring into the dark, I see those orbs unblinking and wonder who's the intruder. It was midsummer, that sweltering stretch in July when the days stretch long and lazy, and the Blue Ridge Parkway hums with distant cars ferrying tourists through the North Carolina hills. Our family's vacation home sat just off the main road, a modest two-story with clapboard siding faded to gray, a gravel drive that crunched under tires, and a screen porch overlooking a meadow dotted with fireflies. We'd inherited it from my uncle, who loved the isolation, far enough from Asheville to feel worlds away, with no neighbors closer than a couple miles through thick woods. I was there alone that weekend, escaping a brutal week at the office where deadlines had piled up like storm clouds. At 34, with a divorce still raw and kids with their mom for the summer, the solitude called to me like an old friend. Recharge, I told myself, packing light, some books, spear, and fishing gear for the nearby stream. The drive up was therapeutic, windows down, mountain air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and pine. By afternoon, I'd settled in, unloaded groceries, cracked a cold one, and lounged on the porch watching fireflies spark to life as the sun dipped low. Peaceful. That's what I craved. The house had that familiar creak to it, boards settling as the heat of the day ebbed, and the meadow beyond the drive glowed with those twinkling lights, like stars fallen to earth. I grilled a steak for dinner, the sizzle mixing with cicadas' drone, and ate inside at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine under the harsh fluorescent light. No TV signal out here. Uncle had never bothered with cable, and my phone showed one flickering bar, enough for texts but spotty for calls. Dusk faded slow, the sky bleeding from orange to deep blue, and I washed up, feeling the week's tension uncoil. Stepped out to the porch again, beer in hand, letting the night wrap around me. Fireflies danced erratic, and a soft breeze rustled the trees lining the drive. It was the kind of quiet that amplifies your thoughts, makes you reflect on choices, the marriage that crumbled, the custody battles, the emptiness that followed. I savored it, though, telling myself this was healing. As full dark settled, around 9, the footsteps started. Crunch on gravel, slow, uneven, like someone favoring a limp, approaching from the end of the drive where it met the parkway. My first thought was a car breakdown. Tourists sometimes pulled over, wandered up seeking help. But no engine rumble, no headlights piercing the night. Just those steps, deliberate, echoing in the still air. I set the beer down, heart quickening a touch, and leaned over the railing, peering into the gloom. The gravel gleamed faintly under moonlight, but nothing visible. No shape, no movement. The fireflies continued their dance, oblivious. Maybe a deer, I reasoned. They'd wander close sometimes, hooves mimicking footfalls on loose stone. But deer moved lighter, quicker. These were heavier, plodding. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice carried, swallowed by the woods. Silence answered, thick and waiting. Then, the crunch resumed, closer now, circling toward the side of the house. Unease prickled my skin, that primal sense of being not alone. I retreated inside, locking the screen door. Flimsy thing, more for bugs than intruders, and flipped the deadbolt on the main one. The house felt bigger suddenly, rooms stretching into shadow. The footsteps continued, gravel giving way to softer thuds on grass as whatever it was circled the perimeter, pausing at doors, then windows, hesitant like assessing. A move to the living room pane, curtains parted just enough to peek. Twilight had given way to black, but moonlight outlined the yard. Empty. No figure, just trees swaying gently. The steps picked up again, now at the back, near the kitchen. Heart racing steadier. I grabbed the fireplace poker from the hearth, cold iron, heavy in my grip, and yelled into the dark. "Who's out there? This is private property." The words felt hollow, echoing back at me. Silence fell, profound, broken only by a distant owl's hoot. I waited, poker raised, sweat beating on my forehead despite the cooling air. Minutes ticked by, 5, 10. Then resuming, crunch, thud, closer than before, right under the side window. Through the glass, I caught the glimpse. A disheveled shape, man-like but wrong. Hunched, with an unkempt beard matted like fur, tattered clothes hanging in shreds, dirt streaked and blending with the night. He, or it, paused, head tilted, sniffing the air like a beast on scent. Not stumbling drunk or lost. Movements predatory, fluid yet cautious, circling with purpose. Eyes glinted in the faint light spilling from the house, sharp and focused. My breath caught. This wasn't a hiker begging aid. It tested the window frame, fingers long, calloused, pressing gently, then moved to the door, knob rattling soft. Panic surged, hot and sharp. I backed away, poker trembling, mind racing. Who was this? A vagrant from the ridges? I'd heard murmurs in town. Hermits gone wild, living in caves or abandoned shacks, shunning society after wars or breakdowns. Uncle used to spin yarns by the fire. The mountains swallow folks whole, spit him back changed. I'd laughed, urban skepticism shielding me. Now, in the dim kitchen, it felt prophetic. I fumbled for my phone on the counter, battery at 20%, signal flickering. Dialed 911, whispering urgently as it connected weakly. Someone trying to break in. I hissed, giving the address. The dispatcher was calm. "Stay inside, sir. Help's en route, but roads are dark. Could be an hour." An hour. The remoteness hit like a weight. The parkway twisted empty at night. No patrols nearby. The figure outside continued its prowl, footsteps echoing rhythmic, interspersed with faint growls or mutters. Low, guttural, like words mangled by disuse. I killed the lights, not wanting to silhouette myself, and crept upstairs, poker in one hand, phone in the other. The attic access was in the hallway, a pull-down ladder leading to dusty storage under the eaves. I climbed up, pulling it closed behind me, huddling among boxes of old holiday decorations and forgotten furniture. The space was cramped, air thick with insulation and age, but it felt safer, removed. Down below, the footsteps persisted, circling, pausing, testing. A doorknob twist here, a window nudge there. Rain started then, soft at first, pattering on the tin roof, growing to a steady drum that masked some sounds but amplified others. A scrape on siding, a breath against glass. I felt watched, that crawling sensation of eyes boring through walls. Phone battery dipped to 10%. I turned it off to conserve, plunging myself into total dark save for faint moonlight through a vent. Mutters carried up occasionally, hoarse fragments, almost pleas, stirring a twisted pity amid the fear. What drove this thing? Hunger from the wilds? Loneliness frayed into madness? Or predation, pure and instinctual, preying on isolated homes like ours? Memories flooded the void. Childhood summers here, running carefree through woods now ominous. Uncle's warnings about straying too far. Things out there don't take kindly to company. The nights stretched eternal, each rain-lashed hour marked by echoes below. Footsteps fading, then returning, growls blending with thunder. Exhaustion clawed at me, but sleep was impossible. Adrenaline kept me vigilant, poker clutched like a talisman. I whispered to myself, reassurances turning to prayers, mind wandering to ex-wife, kids, regrets sharpening in the dark. What if it got in? The ladder was flimsy, a determined push could breach. Rain intensified, roof pounding like a heartbeat, masking the prowler's progress. But I knew it was there, felt it in my bones, that unrelenting presence circling, waiting. Battery life ebbed. A final check showed 5%, no missed calls. Isolation wrapped tight, a smothering blanket, the true terror of Appalachia, where help is miles and mountains away. Growls grew fainter, or perhaps imagined, blending with storm. I huddled smaller, dust tickling my nose, waiting for dawn. First light crept gray through the vent, rain tapering to drizzle. Sound below had ceased sometime in the wee hours. I waited another half hour, ears straining, before easing the ladder down. The house was silent, water dripping from eaves. Poker ready, I descended, checking rooms. Empty, locks intact, no signs of entry. Ventured outside, air fresh with petrichor, meadow glistening. Footprints everywhere, bare calisoles imprinted in mud, weaving the drive and yard, pressing close to foundation before leading toward the woods. They vanished at the tree-line, swallowed by underbrush. No other trace, no discarded items, just those tracks, human yet feral, like feet hardened by endless wandering. I packed that morning, drove to town shaky, reported it to the sheriff. He nodded grim, unsurprised. Happens sometimes up here. Hermits, folks gone wild, Vietnam vets, runaways. Mountains make 'em feral, preying on empty homes. Locals at the diner whispered more. Sightings of ragged figures in the ridges, mutters in the night, disappearances chalked up to accidents. I left the vacation home behind, sold it years later to city folks chasing rustic dreams. But the night lingers, a scar on quiet evenings. Back in suburbia, with alarms and streetlights, I still hear phantom crunch on gravel when rain falls. Avoid the woods, skip solo trips, but the mountains echo in dreams. Footsteps circling, growls in the dark. Was it hunting sustenance, or companionship in madness? The confusion festers, sorrow for whatever soul prowled that drive. Once like me, now claimed by the wild. True aloneness in Appalachia isn't empty. It's filled with unseen eyes, watching eternal. Some nights, staring into shadow, I wonder if it's followed, footsteps faint but approaching. The drive down the parkway that day blurred with adrenaline's aftermath, curves twisting like unresolved thoughts. I stopped at a pullout, staring at ridges cloaked in green, fireflies long gone in daylight. Nothing stirred, but the feeling clung, watched vulnerable. Back home, I threw myself into routine, work, therapy, shared custody weekends. Sessions labeled it trauma from isolation, meds softening edges without erasing. Nights brought insomnia. I check locks twice, hear mutters in wind. Researched sporadically. Forums on Appalachian hermits. Blurry photos of disheveled men in woods. Stories of break-ins dismissed as animals. One account chilled. A vacationer alone. Footsteps circling till dawn. Tracks leading nowhere. Pattern? Or paranoia breeding echoes? Years passed. Remarried. A stepson now. We vacation at beaches, open horizons chasing away ridge's grip. But midsummer fireflies trigger it, twinkling lights stirring unease. Wife notices, squeezes my hand. Old ghosts, I say. Inside, sorrow swells for the preyed upon. Me then, or that feral shadow now? What if it was kin, a lost relative uncle knew? He took secrets to his grave, considered returning once to face the drive, but turned back at the foothills, pulse racing. The gravel hides too much, footsteps phantom, always approaching. Fear lingers quiet, confusion a companion, growling that the wild claims its own, leaving sorrow in the crunch of unseen souls. I decided to stay alone in my brother's ridgetop cabin near the Blue Ridge Parkway for a writing retreat, figuring the crisp fall air and solitude would spark some inspiration after months of creative drought. It was late September, leaves turning in fiery bursts of red and gold, carpeting the ground like a patchwork quilt. The cabin perched on a high knob in western North Carolina, accessible only by a winding gravel road that branched off the parkway near mile marker 400. My brother, a park ranger, used it as a getaway, but with his work keeping him in town, it sat empty most of the year. Simple setup: log walls, a loft bedroom, a deck overlooking misty valleys that stretched into Virginia. No internet, spotty cell service, just a landline for emergencies and a generator if power failed. Perfect for focusing, I told myself, packing notebooks, a laptop, and enough food for a week. At 41, with a string of unpublished manuscripts and a day job grinding me down, this felt like a last shot at reclaiming my passion. The drive up was mesmerizing, twisting roads flanked by exploding foliage, mist clinging to the hollows like forgotten breath. I arrived mid-afternoon, unloaded, and settled in with a cup of coffee on the deck, watching the sun dip toward the ridges. Peaceful. That's what I kept repeating. The first evening unfolded quietly. I scribbled notes by the wood stove, flames crackling as the temperature dropped. Fall nights came quick up here, chills seeping through cracks despite the insulation. Mist rolled in from the valleys, softening the treetops into ghostly shapes. I cooked pasta on the gas stove, ate while reading an old thriller from the shelf, something about lost hikers that mirrored the isolation outside. By 9, fatigue from the drive hit, so I climbed to the loft, bed creaking under me. The cabin hummed with small sounds, wind sighing through pines, leaves rustling below. Sleep came easy, dreamless, lulled by the mountain's rhythm. Morning brought fog so thick I could barely see the deck railing, but it burned off by noon, revealing the carpet of leaves glowing in sunlight. I hiked a short loop trail nearby, notebook in pocket, jotting ideas sparked by the scenery, twisted roots like veins, hollows whispering secrets. Back at the cabin, I wrote for hours, words flowing for the first time in ages. The retreat was working. Solitude sharpened my focus, the mist a veil between me and the world's distractions. As the second night deepened, the murmurs started. Low, fragmented voices drifting from the ridge behind the cabin. Like a conversation just out of reach, words blending into the wind's moan. I was on the deck after dinner, nursing a whiskey, staring into the valleys where mist clung stubborn even after dark. The air hung heavy, scented with decaying leaves and damp earth. At first, I thought it was my imagination or maybe echoes from distant hikers on the parkway. But no, the road was miles below and traffic thinned to nothing after sunset. The sounds rose and fell, guttural tones that almost formed sentences but dissolved before clarity. I set the glass down, straining to hear, stepping to the railing. The deck overlooked a steep drop, trees marching down into fog-shrouded hollows. Nothing visible, just shifting shadows. The murmurs faded as I listened, swallowed by the night. Shrugging it off, wind through branches, perhaps, I headed inside, locking the door behind me. The cabin felt cozier now, lamplight warm against the black windows. I wrote a bit more, but distraction nagged, ears attuned to every creak. Back at the desk, they returned, closer this time, seeping through the walls like smoke. Not loud, but insistent, fragmented whispers that teased the edge of understanding. Unease built slow, a gnaw in my stomach. I paused typing, listening. Was it voices? People out there? The ridge was remote. No trails led up here except the access road. I checked the perimeter lights, motion sensors my brother installed after bear sightings. Flicking them on flooded the yard in harsh white, illuminating the leaf-strewn ground and the fence line where woods pressed close. Nothing stirred at first. Then a shadow darted between trees, quick, humanoid, but feral in its gait, limbs elongated in the haze. My breath caught. Not a bear, too upright. It froze at the light's edge, then approached stealthily, weaving through underbrush. Pressing against the fence, it stared, eyes fixed on the warm glow inside, reflecting the bulbs like pinpricks. No words escaped it, just intense stares and occasional hisses, low and warning, like a cornered animal. Heart thudding, I backed from the window, mind racing. A hiker? Lost in the mist. But the movements weren't desperate. They were calculated, probing. I secured everything. Doors bolted, windows latched, even a loft hatch pulled tight. The figure lingered at the fence, silhouetted against the mist, head tilting as if listening. Then it climbed, fingers gripping wood slats, hauling itself over with primal ease. Face pale and scarred from wilderness life, skin etched with lines like bark, hair matted with leaves. It landed softly on the deck, footsteps muffled on planks. I retreated upstairs to the loft, grabbing a heavy flashlight from the nightstand. More club than light. From the small window up there, I watched it prowl, circling the cabin, testing vents with dirty nails, peering up the chimney with a sniff. Hisses punctuated its efforts, frustrated or curious. Power flickered then, once, twice, before outage plunged us into shared darkness. The generator was outside, unreachable now. Moonlight filtered through clouds, casting the ridge in ethereal gray, but inside, blackness pressed. I huddled in the loft, back against the wall, flashlight off to concert battery. Its breaths synchronized with mine through thin barriers, audible now, ragged and close, seeping from below. The murmurs returned, louder in the quiet, fragmented pleas or threats whispered at the base of the stairs. Unease twisted into fear. This wasn't random. Stories my brother told surfaced. Mountain outcasts, folks driven feral by isolation, living in hidden crevices of the ridges. Descendants of old settlers, perhaps, or modern dropouts shattered by life, surviving on instinct alone. He'd laughed them off as legends, but his eyes always held a flicker of doubt. Now, in the suffocating dark, they wrapped around me. The figure moved methodically, thuds on walls, scratches at siding, hisses echoing up. Rain started soft, pattering the roof, masking some but amplifying others. A creak on the deck, a breath fogging a downstairs pane. Hours blurred. I checked my watch by phone glow. Midnight, 1-2. Signal was dead up here. Landline downstairs useless now. Isolation clamped down, the ridge a vast, indifferent witness. My mind wandered in the void, filling silence with horrors. What did it want? Warmth? Food? Or company? A soul to drag into its misty world? Scars on its face suggested years in the wild. Fights with animals, exposure's toll. A low moan carried up once, sorrowful, almost human, stirring pity amid terror. Was it once like me, seeking retreat, only to be claimed by the mountains? The loft grew colder, mist seeping through vents, breaths sinking closer. I gripped the flashlight, knuckles white, imagining it climbing stairs, fingers on the hatch. No sudden assault, just patient probing, wearing down resolve. Dawn's gray light finally seeped in, mist dispersing like reluctant ghosts. Sounds tapered, the prowling ceased, hisses fading into wind. I waited, cramped and chilled, until sun pierced the valleys. Descending cautiously, loft hatch creaking, I found the cabin intact, but marked. Claw scratches on vents, handprints on sills, a sense of violation hanging heavy. Outside, mist lifted fully, revealing the ridge in autumn splendor. Leaves vibrant, valleys clear. But claw marks scored the deck railing, deep grooves from its grip. Footprints circled the fence, bare, elongated, vanishing into underbrush toward the misty hollows. No other signs, no tools, no camp remnants. Just evidence of intrusion, a feral visitor retreating with the night. I packed that day, drove down the parkway shaky, brother's cabin shrinking in the rear view. Told him a vague story, animals scratching around. But his pause on the phone suggested he knew more. Locals in town whispered when I stopped for gas. Outcasts in the ridges, driven mad by solitude, drawn to ridgetop lights like moths. Real intruders, they said, ghosts of the forgotten. I left the mountains behind, returned to city noise, but the retreat scarred me. Years later, married with a quiet life, I avoid ridges, stick to flatlands where mist doesn't cling. But fall leaves trigger it. Murmurs in wind, shadows darting in peripherals. Writing flows now, but laced with dread, stories echoing that night. Was it an outcast, surviving feral, or a legend made flesh? The ridge's guardian, resenting solitude's thieves? Confusion lingers, sorrow for whatever haunted the mist. Once human, now echo. Some nights, staring into valleys of memory, breaths sink with unseen presence, hisses whispering just out of reach. The quiet ridges hold their outcasts close, and mine follows, a lingering violation in the dark. The drive back that day wound through flaming foliage, but beauty felt mocking, ridges watchful. I stopped at an overlook, mist still threading hollows below, half expecting eyes to glint from trees. Nothing, yet unease coiled. Home in the suburbs, I threw out the notebooks, pages tainted by whispers. Sleep evaded, dreams replayed the prowl, hisses shaping words I strained for. Therapy deemed it anxiety from isolation, pills dulling but not erasing. Researched sporadically, forums on Appalachian ferals, blurry photos of scarred faces in mist, tales of ridgetop sieges. One account mirrored, writer alone, murmurs drawing a pale intruder, claw marks left as warning. Pattern? Or minds fraying in solitude's grip? Time's softened edges. Remarried, a stepdaughter now, vacations coastal where horizons open wide. But misty mornings stir it. Valleys in fog, murmurs in breeze. Wife notices pallor, asks softly. Old retreat, I murmur. Inside, sorrow swells for the violated. Me then, or that scarred soul now? What if it sought help, hisses twisted pleas? Brother sold the cabin eventually, buyers unaware of legends. Considered visiting once, to face the ridge, but turned back at the parkway, pulse echoing thuds. Mist hides too much, murmurs echoing, breaths sinking eternal. Fear confuses, sorrow whispers that isolation claims all, leaving dread in quiet ridge's embrace. It was the Christmas after my divorce, that hollow stretch of December where the holidays feel like a cruel joke, all twinkling lights and forced cheer masking the ache underneath. My parents had offered their remote lodge along the Blue Ridge Parkway as a refuge. Get away from the city, they said, breathe some mountain air, sort through your head. They were heading to Florida for warmer climes, escaping the snow that blanketed Western Virginia in relentless white. At 37, with no kids to distract me and a job that had graciously given me the week off, I took them up on it. The lodge was a sturdy A-frame, built in the 70s with thick pine logs and a stone fireplace that dominated the living room. Perched on a secluded spur off the parkway near mile marker 200, it overlooked ridges that plunged into foggy valleys, no neighbors for miles. Just endless forest muffled under fresh powder. I arrived mid-afternoon on the 23rd, tires crunching over the unplowed drive, the world already hushed by the accumulating snow. Unloaded groceries, strung up the old Christmas lights along the porch railing, multicolored bulbs my mom insisted on every year, and settled in with a fire crackling, trying to convince myself this solitude was a gift, not a punishment. The first evening passed in quiet routine. I cooked a simple meal, steak and potatoes in the cast-iron skillet, while holiday music played softly from the radio, static-laced carols that felt distant, like echoes from someone else's life. Outside, snow fell steady, blanketing the landscape in a pristine shroud that muffled every sound. No wind howling, no branches snapping, just a profound silence that pressed against the windows. The Christmas lights twinkled merrily on the porch, casting a rainbow glow over the drifts, but the solitude weighed heavy, amplifying every creak of the lodge settling. I sipped whiskey by the fire, flipping through family photo albums, smiling faces from better times, kids building snowmen in that very yard. Memories stirred. Childhood winters here, sledding down the ridge with siblings, parents laughing over hot cocoa. Now alone, those echoes felt ghostly, the empty rooms stretching vast. By 10, fatigue pulled me to the upstairs bedroom, bed piled with quilts against the chill. Sleep came fitful, interrupted by the occasional pop from the dying fire below, but nothing ominous. Just the quiet dread of holidays spent in isolation. Morning brought more snow, the world outside a monochrome canvas, trees heavy with white, the parkway invisible in the distance. I shoveled the porch half-heartedly, breath fogging in the crisp air, then spent the day reading, writing emails that wouldn't send until I drove to town. Cell service was non-existent up here. The landline worked sporadically, but with the storm building, even that felt unreliable. Afternoon faded early, sun dipping behind ridges by 4, plunging the lodge into twilight. I lit the Christmas tree in the corner, fake pine with ornaments from decades past, and prepared a modest feast. Turkey sandwich, pie from the freezer. Ate by the window, watching flakes dance in the porch light. Solitude shifted then, from comforting to oppressive, the snow muffling sounds until the world felt entombed. No carols now. I turned off the radio, preferring the quiet. But as full dark settled, around 6, the silhouettes appeared. At first, I thought tricks of light, shadows from swaying branches of the treeline, where forest met the cleared yard. But no wind stirred. The air hung still, snow falling straight down. I was washing dishes when I noticed them, multiple slender forms shifting in the gloom just beyond the light's reach. 3, maybe 4, tall upright, postures too purposeful for wildlife. Deer would bound, bears lumber. These moved with intent, gliding between trunks like wraiths. My hands stilled in the sink, water dripping forgotten. Heart picked up a notch. Hikers? Lost in the storm? But no one hiked these ridges in winter dark, especially off-trail. The parkway was closed to traffic by now, gates down miles away. I dried my hands, moved to the living room window, peering out. The silhouettes circled slowly toward the porch, breaths visible in the cold air, puffs of white sinking in rhythm, like a pack coordinating. Unease coiled low. This wasn't random wandering. I dimmed the interior lights, not wanting to backlight myself, and observe from the shadows. Closer now, details emerged in the Christmas glow, ragged figures, feral in appearance, with wild hair tangled like vines, makeshift coverings, scraps of fabric or hides draped over emaciated frames. Not clothed for weather, exposed skin pale and weathered, like hides tanned by endless exposure. They weren't approaching boldly, no rush to the door begging shelter, but probing, one venturing to the porch steps while others watched from the periphery, eyes glinting faint. The leader, if that's what it was, tested the bottom step, foot bare in the snow, weight shifting slow as if gauging response. A soft chant or hum emanated then, unsettling in its rhythm. Low tones blending into a murmur, almost melodic but off-key, like voices in used to harmony. Not words I could discern, but purposeful, sending chills deeper than the cold. My mind raced. Vagrants? A family gone wild? I'd heard whispers growing up, parents cautioning about mountain folk, clans forgotten in the peaks, descendants of old settlers or runaways living feral, shunning society for the wild's embrace. Panic edged in. I bolted the front door, already locked, but I double-checked, then the back windows too. Grabbed a kitchen knife, blade cold in my palm, more comfort than weapon. The figures persisted, shadows dancing across windows as they circled the porch. One pressed close to the glass, face obscured by matted hair, but eyes, hollow, intent, locked on the warm interior. Breaths fogged the pain, rhythmic and close. The hum continued, weaving through the group, rising and falling like a ritual. I retreated to the couch, knife gripped tight, heart hammering. Phone service failed. Landline dead, no dial tone. The storm must have downed lines. Cell showed no bars. Emergency calls futile in these ridges. Truly cut off. The lodge a lit beacon in endless white, drawing whatever lurked. Snow muffled their steps, but I heard them. Soft thuds on planks, fingers trailing railing, occasional knocks like invitations to doom. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap. Hours ticked by in that patient siege. I sat rigid, fire dying to embers, room growing cold. The silhouettes rotated roles, one probing a window latch while others hummed watchfully. breath sinking in the chill. No aggression, no smashing glass, just relentless presence wearing down nerves. My mind filled the void with fears. Were they human? Once, perhaps, escaped from lives fractured by poverty or madness, turned feral in the peaks. Parents' stories resurfaced, tales of clans and hidden hollows, surviving winters on game and roots, drawn to lone dwellers for supplies or company. I dismissed them as folklore, but now, knife trembling, they felt prophetic. A knock came closer, on the door, soft but insistent, followed by a hum that vibrated through wood. I whispered, "Go away," voice cracking, but only seemed to encourage, shadows shifting nearer. Midnight passed, clock ticking mocking. Snow piled higher, world shrinking to the lodge's glow. I considered the attic, higher ground, but fear pinned me. Breaths at windows grew synchronized with mine, as if mocking. A low moan joined the hum once. Sorrowful, human, stirring twisted empathy. What drove them here? Storm's desperation? Or ritual? The holidays summoning forgotten souls? Exhaustion blurred edges. I dozed fitfully, jolting at every tap. Dawn crept gray, light filtering through curtains, snow ceasing. The siege tapered, hums fading, silhouettes retreating to tree lean, vanishing into forest like mist. Ventured out at full light, knife pocketed. Porch pristine save for disturbances. Tracks, several sets, weaving around the foundation. Bare soles imprinted deep before vanishing into woods. No other signs, no tools, no leavings. Just evidence of encirclement, a silent claim. Packed that day, drove to town shaky. Locals at the diner nodded grim when I described it. Forgotten clans up there, gone wild in the peaks. Drawn to lights, lone folks. Seen it myself. Whispers of sightings, ragged groups in storms, humming old hymns twisted by time. Left the lodge behind, parents understanding my vague excuses. Years on, holidays bring dread. Twinkling lights, stirring silhouettes in memory. Remarried, family now, but I avoid ridges, opt for city cheer. Its snow muffles sounds and dreams, hums echoing faint. Were they clans, surviving feral, or echoes of isolation's toll, mirroring my own fractures? Confusion lingers, sorrow for those shadows. Once kin, perhaps claimed by peaks. Some winters staring into white, breaths visible. I feel watched, knocks inviting from the gloom. The blue ridge holds its forgotten close, etching quiet dread eternal. The drive down that morning slicked with melt, parkway empty save for plows. Stopped in an overlook, ridges blanketed white, half expecting forms at tree leans. Nothing but chill clung. Back in the city, threw myself into normalcy. Work, therapy, holidays with crowds. Sessions called it hallucination from solitude, meds softening but not erasing. Nights replayed the siege. Hums rhythmic, knocks persistent. Research sporadically, books on Appalachian lore, forums of sightings. Ragged clans and peaks, drawn to lone lights, tracks vanishing. One tale mirrored, holiday alone, encircled by humming shadows, dread lingering. Pattern? Or minds unraveling in isolation's grip. Time dulled acuity. Kids came, home filled with laughter, but winter's trigger, snow falling, lights twinkling. Wife notices withdrawal, hold me close. Old ghosts, I murmur. Inside, sorrow swells for the encircled. Me then, or those feral forms now? What if they sought warmth? Hums twisted carols. Parents sold the lodge eventually, buyers unaware. Considered returning once, to face the porch, but turned back at foothills, pulse echoing taps. Snow hides too much, silhouettes circling, breaths sinking eternal. Fear confuses, sorrow hums that peaks claim all, leaving invitations in the dark. It was a clear spring weekend in early May, the kind where the Blue Ridge Parkway bursts with new life. Wildflowers dotting the roadside, trees unfurling fresh green leaves that rustle softly in the breeze. I'd agreed to pet sit for my friend Mark in his mountainside home off the parkway, up near the Tennessee border where the ridges roll like ancient spines. Mark was off on a business trip, and his two cats, Whiskers and Shadow, needed someone to keep them company. At 29, working a dead-end desk job in Knoxville, the gig sounded like a mini vacation. Free run of a cozy A-frame with stunning views, no rent due. Just feed the cats and water the plants. The house clung to a steep slope, accessible by a narrow gravel road that switchbacked up from the main highway. No close neighbors. The nearest was a mile down through thick woods, and cell service dropped to nothing once you crested the drive. But the starry nights were legendary, Mark had said, pinning a key to my palm. "You'll love the quiet." I nodded, packing an overnight bag with books and snacks, eager for the break from city noise. The drive up was peaceful, sunlight filtering through the canopy, and by evening, I'd settled in. Cats fed, a simple pasta dinner simmering, the house smelling of pine and faint cat litter. The first night unfolded easy. I lounged on the couch with Whiskers curled in my lap, reading a mystery novel while Shadow batted at a toy mouse across the hardwood floor. Outside, the starry sky stretched endless, pinpricks of light unmarred by city glow. The bedroom was upstairs, a loft space with slanted ceilings and a large window overlooking the valley, perfect for stargazing from bed. I turned in around 11, windows cracked for the cool mountain air, the cats settling at my feet. Sleep came fitful at first, the unfamiliar creaks of the house settling, the distant hoot of an owl echoing through the woods. But exhaustion won, pulling me under into fragmented dreams of wandering paths that led nowhere. Sometime after midnight, a presence stirred me, a subtle shift in the air, like the room had grown heavier. I rolled over, half asleep, eyes fluttering open to the window. That's when I saw it. Breath fogging the pane, rhythmic and close, condensing in slow puffs against the glass. My heart stuttered, sleep's haze shattering. I sat up slowly, sheets tangling, staring at the window. The fog bloomed and faded like someone or something standing just outside, exhaling steadily. The stars beyond blurred through the mist, but no shape at first. Then, as my eyes adjusted, a face materialized, gaunt shadowed, with feral eyes peering in, wide and unblinking. Mouth slightly agape, lips cracked and pale, as if frozen mid-breath. Not a dream. The details sharpened, dirt-smudged skin stretched tight over cheekbones, hair matted and wild, tangled with twigs. It lingered there, studying me with an intensity that sent ice through my veins. No movement, just that stare, breaths syncing with the fog's rhythm. I jolted fully awake, a gasp escaping, but it didn't flinch. Instead, a finger rose, long, nail-blackened, and tapped gently on the glass once, twice, as if beckoning, inviting me closer. Terror surged, hot and primal. I screamed, scrambling back against the headboard, sheets kicking off. The cats bolted, hissing, vanishing under the bed. The face didn't flee. Instead, it tilted slightly, mouth curving in what might have been a smile or grimace, tapping again, insistent but soft. The house was locked. I checked doors and windows before bed, a habit from city living, but fear clawed rational thought away. What was this? A neighbor? No, too remote. A hiker lost? But the eyes held no plea, just hunger, curious, predatory. I lunged for the bedside lamp, clicking it on. Light flooded the loft, casting the face in stark relief. Pale scars crisscrossing the forehead, eyes hollowed by shadow, reflecting the bulb like animal shine. It recoiled a fraction at the brightness, but didn't leave, breath still fogging, tap-tap persisting. I tumbled from bed, feet hitting cold floor, and ran downstairs to the living room, flipping every switch. Overhead, lamps, even the kitchen fluorescents, blazing the house like daytime. Heart hammering, I grabbed my phone from the counter. No bars, signal dead as always up here. The landline, where was it? Buried under mail on the table. I dialed 911, but the line crackled static, storm, or isolation killing the connection. No help coming. The parkway was empty at this hour, roads twisting dark for miles. Outside, I heard it move, nails trailing the siding with a slow scrape, like fingers feeling the house's skin. Peeking from the living room window confirmed. A lone intruder, clad in scraps of fabric, torn flannel, perhaps layered with hides or trash, moving with animal grace along the exterior. Tall but hunched, steps deliberate on the soft earth. Perhaps once human, but now wild, body honed by the wood's harsh demands. It paused at the corner, head cocking as if listening to my panic inside. The back door rattled then, handle jiggling persistently, metal clicking soft. Not forceful, but testing, patient. I backed to the couch, grabbing a fire poker from the hearth. Iron heavy, cold comfort. The scraping continued, circling now, sighting to window frames, nails dragging faint. Shadow past the glass, elongated, distorted by light. Pausing to peer in again, breath fogging anew. Eyes met mine through the pane, unblinking, mouth agape, in silent study. What did it want? Entry? Me? Tales Mark had shared surfaced. Casual bar stories from locals about vagrants turned feral in these woods. Folks vanished into the ridges after breakdowns or escapes, surviving as shadows, silent invaders exploiting isolation for inscrutable needs. I'd laughed them off as urban legends, but now, poker trembling, they wrapped tight. The jiggle at the door ceased, replaced by a low hum, almost a sigh, carried on the night air. It moved to another window, tapping gently, beckoning. I retreated upstairs again, but the loft felt exposed with that window. Instead, I barricaded in the bathroom, door locked, held my refuge, poker across my lap. Hiding under a blanket from the linen closet, I endured, ears straining. The nights stretched infinite, scrapes intermittent, shadows passing windows below, breaths fogging glass in rhythmic condemnation. No crash, no forced entry, just relentless presence, wearing my nerves raw. Mind raced through possibilities. Escaped patient from some distant facility? A hermit warped by years alone? Or something familial? Mark had mentioned old family lore, ancestors lost to the mountains in the 1800s, whispers of wild kin haunting the bloodline. Delirium, perhaps, but the taps felt real, echoing my pulse. Cats mewed faintly from hiding, adding to the chorus of dread. Hours blurred, 2, 3, 4, phone battery dying from futile signal checks. Spring air turned clammy with sweat, blanket stifling but safer than exposure. Dawn's gray light filtered eventually, stars fading to pastel. Sounds tapered, the scraping hushed, taps ceased. I waited, cramped and aching, until sun crested the ridges, warming the house. Creeping out, poker ready, I checked rooms. Empty, locks intact. Outside, dawn chased shadows away, but evidence lingered. Smudged prints on the bedroom window, palm flat, fingers splayed, as if pressed long. More on siding, faint trails of dirt, and a lingering scent of earth and decay wafting near the back door, like rot from deep woods. Footprints ring the foundation, bare, calloused, weaving before vanishing downslope into underbrush. No other trace, no dropped items, just that violation, a silent claim on night. I fed the cats with shaking hands, packed my bag, left Mark a voicemail from town, vague about noises, blaming wildlife. But the encounter burrowed deep, a quiet rot. Back in Knoxville, with locks and lights and noise, starry nights lost appeal. I draw curtains tight, hear breaths in wind. Avoid the mountains, skip hikes, but spring blooms stir it. Starlight mocking, taps faint on glass. Was it vagrant, feral by choice or circumstance, or legend incarnate? The woods whisper made flesh? Confusion gnaws, sorrow for whatever peered in. Once person, now echo of isolation's toll. Some nights, blanket pulled high, I feel studied, breath fogging unseen pains, inscrutable needs lurking just beyond. The blue ridge claims its silent invaders, and mine lingers, a gripping sorrow in the dark. The drive down that morning blurred with adrenaline, switchbacks twisting like unresolved fears. I stopped at a pullout, valleys greening below, half expecting eyes from trees. Nothing but scent clung, earth decay, to my clothes. Home, I scrubbed raw, threw out the bag, as if fabric held the presence. Sleep evaded. Dreams replayed the face, taps shaping invitations I strained against. Therapy labeled it intrusion trauma, pills blurring edges without erasing core. Nights, I'd freeze at window rattles. Wind, always wind, but doubt seeded. Research sporadically. Forums on Appalachian vagrants, blurry photos of gaunt figures in woods, stories of pet sitters besieged, prints vanishing. One account chilled. Mountainside home, breath fogging glass, feral eyes beckoning till dawn. Pattern? Or isolation fraying minds alike? Years passed. Engaged now, city life anchoring, but spring stars trigger. Constellations mocking from balconies. Fiancé notices stares into night. Holds me. Old gig, I whisper. Inside, sorrow swells for the exploited. Me then, or that gaunt soul now. What if it needed help? Taps twisted pleas. Mark sold the house eventually, buyers unaware of tales. Considered returning once, to face the window, but turned back at the parkway, breath fogging car glass. Woods hide too much, feral eyes watching, breaths rhythmic eternal. Fear confuses, sorrow taps that isolation invites invaders, leaving inscrutable needs in starry night's embrace. It was the middle of a brutal heat wave in late July, the kind that turns the Blue Ridge Mountains into a steam bath, where even the cicadas sound exhausted and the air hangs thick enough to chew. Our family's summer retreat sat tucked off a narrow side road near the Blue Ridge Parkway in southwestern Virginia, a modest cedar shingle house built by my grandfather in the early 80s. It was never meant to be fancy, just a place to escape the lowland heat, with a widescreen porch, ceiling fans that whirred constantly, and windows on every side to catch whatever breeze might wander through. My parents had planned to come up with me, but work kept them in Richmond, so at 35, nursing a bruised ego after a recent breakup, I came alone. "You'll have the place to yourself," Mom had said. "Cool off, read, relax." I loaded the car with books, a cooler of drinks, and enough groceries to last a week, telling myself the solitude would be healing. The drive up the parkway was beautiful. Ridges rolling green under a hazy sky. Overlooks empty of tourists in the midday scorch. By the time I pulled into the gravel drive, sweat already soaked my shirt, and I wasted no time unloading and cranking every fan a high. The first day passed in a languid haze. I lounged on the porch with a cold beer, watching heat shimmer off the meadow, then retreated inside as the afternoon baked everything still. The house smelled of old wood and lemon polish, familiar and comforting. I cooked a light supper, sandwiches, nothing that required the oven, and settled on the couch with a novel, fans stirring the air into a tolerable rhythm. Outside, the woods pressed close. Thick oaks and poplars, underbrush dense with mountain laurel and ferns, leaves hanging limp in the heat. No wind, no birds afternoon, just the steady drone of insects and the occasional distant rumble of thunder that never quite arrived. As evening finally cooled, the temperature dropping maybe 10 degrees, I opened a few windows to let the night in. Crickets started their chorus, fireflies blinked on in the meadow, and for a while it felt perfect, quiet, private mine. I even stepped onto the porch again, barefoot on warm boards, breathing deep the scent of pine and earth. That's when the rustling began. It was subtle at first, a soft disturbance in the leaves beyond the screened edge of the porch. Not the random stir of a breeze, but deliberate, like something pushing slowly through the brush. I froze, listening. The meadow was still, fireflies drifting undisturbed, yet the rustle continued, measured and low, coming from the tree line about 40 feet away. Probably a deer, I told myself. They move through here all the time, especially at dusk. I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer, clicked it on, and aimed the beam toward the sound. The light cut through the gloom, illuminating trunks and foliage, but nothing moved. The rustling paused, as if aware of the attention. I called out softly, "Hey, who's there?" Half joking, half nervous. Silence answered, thick and waiting. Shaking it off, I went back inside, latched the screen door, and tried to return to my book. But the quiet felt different now, watchful. Minutes later, It resumed, closer this time, a careful parting of leaves that circled toward the side of the house. My pulse quickened. I set the book down and moved to the screen door again, peering into the dark. The rustling stopped abruptly. In the faint glow from the porch bulb, I saw it. A hidden watcher, crouched low among the ferns, feral form blending almost perfectly with the foliage. Human-shaped but wrong, knees bent, head forward, motionless now that I'd spotted it. My breath caught. The figure froze too, only the glint of eyes betraying life. Then, slowly, it advanced, hands outstretched like claws, fingers curled, moving with a predator's patience. Not running, not stumbling, just deliberate steps that crushed leaves under bare feet. Panic set in sharp and sudden. I slammed the wooden door shut, fingers fumbling with the deadbolt, heart slamming against ribs. The house was locked, had been since dusk, but that felt flimsy now. It followed, circling with patient rustles that traced the perimeter of the walls. I killed the interior lights one by one, not wanting to silhouette myself, and crouched by the living room window, peering through a narrow gap in the curtains. Through the screen, I saw it clearly. Dirt-caked skin stretched over thin bones, matted hair hanging in ropes, clothes reduced to ragged strips that might once have been a shirt or pants. A being shaped by the wilds, scars and scratches mapping years of exposure, eyes wide and shining with animal focus. It paused at the corner of the house, head tilting as if listening, then pressed close to a vent near the foundation, inhaling deeply, nostrils flaring. A whisper escaped, incoherent, hoarse, words broken by disuse, drifting through the screen like smoke. Not pleading, not threatening, to sound raw and unsettling. I backed away, grabbing my phone from the coffee table. No signal, of course. This high up, the dead zone was absolute. The landline sat on the kitchen counter. I lifted the receiver, dead, probably heat or age, killing the line miles away. No escape. The gravel road was empty. The parkway a distant ribbon with no traffic after dark. I was alone, truly alone, in a house that suddenly felt paper thin. The rustling continued, slow circuits around the foundation, occasional thumps as it tested the structure, shoulder or palm pressing against siding. Once it paused beneath the bedroom window upstairs, whispering again, breath audible through the screen. I retreated to the hallway closet, the only interior space without windows, pulling the door shut and huddling among coats and boxes, a kitchen knife clutched in sweating hands. The night stretched endless, rustles fading, then returning, thumps soft but deliberate, whispers rising and falling like a tide. No smashing, no forced entry, just vigil, patient and wearing, as if time meant nothing to whatever circled outside. My mind raced in the dark, filling silence with fragments of stories I'd heard growing up. Neighbors down the mountain murmuring about mountain folk gone astray, old-timers who disappeared into the woods after the mines closed, or runaways from decades past, surviving feral in hidden camps. They watched the houses. One old man had said at the country store, voice low, "Wait for the ones alone." I'd smiled politely then, city skepticism shielding me. Now, knife trembling, those words wrapped cold around my throat. Was this one of them? A survivor warped by isolation, drawn to the faint light and sound of habitation? The whispers grew clearer at times, fragments that almost formed names or maybe warnings. A thump directly overhead made me flinch. It had climbed the porch railing, weight settling on the roof for a moment before sliding down again. Hours blurred. Midnight, too, for sweat cooling on my skin despite the heat, every creak of the house amplifying dread. I thought of screaming, of turning on every light and confronting it, but fear kept me curled tight, breath shallow, waiting for sunrise. Dawn finally seeped gray through the cracks around the closet door, the night's vigil easing with the first bird calls. The rustling stopped. Whispers faded into ordinary insect hum. I waited another hour, muscles cramped, before easing the door open. The house was silent, fans still whirring. Knife ready, I checked every room. Empty, lock secure. Outside, Morning light revealed the aftermath. Leaves trampled in a wide circle around the foundation, stems crushed where it had crouched and paced. Tracks, bare calisoles, pressed deep into the soft earth, weaving through the brush before vanishing under thicker foliage, leading nowhere visible. No other signs, no dropped belongings, no clear path into the deeper woods. Just the lingering scent of sweat and wild earth near the vents, and a profound sense of violation hanging in the still air. I packed in a rush, fed the cats with shaking hands, and drove down the mountain before noon, windows up despite the heat. Told my parents a vague story about feeling unwell. They understood, never pressed. But the ordeal instilled a profound, quiet terror that never fully left. Back in Richmond, with traffic and streetlights and neighbors, I still hear rustling on still nights, leaves betraying movement just beyond sight. I avoid the woods, skip hiking trails, keep curtains drawn when heat hangs heavy. Neighbors' murmurs echo in memory. Feral survivors haunting remote homes, watching for the embrace of Appalachia's endless green. Was it hunger, curiosity, or something darker that drew it to my solitary light? The question gnaws, confusion mingling with sorrow for whatever soul it once was, lost to the mountains, shaped by their indifference. Some evenings, when the air grows thick and still, I feel unseen eyes, patient and waiting, rustling just at the edge of hearing. The wild doesn't let go easily, and part of me remains there, circled in the dark, listening for whispers that never quite form words. The drive home that day blurred, curves of the parkway twisting like doubts, overlooks empty under a merciless sun. I stopped once, staring into the green sea below, half convinced movement flickered in the foliage. Nothing, yet the feeling clung, a second skin. Back in the city, I showered until the water ran cold, trying to scrub away the scent of earth and decay that seemed to follow. Sleep came hard. Dreams replayed the crouch, the slow advance, whispers shaping my name. Therapy called it acute stress from isolation, prescribed rest I couldn't find. Nights, I'd startle at every sound. Wind and trees outside my apartment becoming rustles, thumps on walls that weren't there. Researched in the small hours. Old newspaper clippings about disappearances along the parkway, forum threads on wild men sightings, grainy photos of gaunt figures half hidden in brush. One story mirrored mine too closely. Summer house alone. Rustling watcher circling till dawn, tracks vanishing into leaves. Coincidence? Or a pattern the mountains keep quiet? Years have passed. I'm married now. A small house in the suburbs with motion lights and a dog that barks at shadows. We vacation at the beach, open horizons replacing ridges. But heat waves bring it back. The thick air, the stillness, the sense of being studied. My wife notices when I check locks twice, asks gently, "Old summer," I say, voice flat. Inside, sorrow lingers for the sanctuary violated and for whatever crouched outside. Once human, now claimed by the wild's patient hunger. I wonder if it still watches empty houses, waiting for solitary lights to flicker on. Some nights, when the leaves rustle, just so, I feel it near, unseen eyes in Appalachia's embrace, whispering incoherently at the edge of hearing. The terror is quiet, profound, and endless.